What's up, guys? It's Ben with 2020 election predictions. And in today's video, I'm going to look at the 2020 presidential election if the election were held today. Um, right now, it's really not looking good for President Trump. And so I definitely think that he would underperform what my projection was on June 1st. So looking right here, this is the electoral map that I projected in June 1st. And this would be if the election were held on election day, which is November 3rd, 2020. And as you can see, it's as close as can be. It actually comes down to the congressional districts in Maine and Nebraska, and also have Wisconsin, Arizona, and Florida all just tilting to the Republicans. So obviously, there's a lot of things that can change. But also Minnesota and Pennsylvania had it just tilting to the Democrats. So there is a lot of wiggle room, 52 for the Republicans, 30 for the Democrats. However, there's a lot of things that have changed in our politics. Just to mention a few, Donald Trump's approval ratings have fallen a lot. Gallup last month had him at 49. Right now he's at 39. A lot of new polls are coming out. So I'll just look at these kind of the real clear politics national average of the polls. Trump is down by like an average of 8.1. And we had this one poll that came out of CNN, which I do think was a little bit biased. The Trump campaign pushed back on this poll heavily, saying that it was very skewed. Kind of the number of registered Republicans wasn't where it should be. And I agree with that. But, I mean, we see a lot of polls, Biden +8, Biden +7, Biden +6, Biden +10. And this has been a general trend recently after the George Floyd protests, and especially with coronavirus as well. And then one other thing I wanted to point out before diving into the electoral map is the fact that the betting odds are in Biden's favor, the most that they have been for the entire election. So typically, even during the coronavirus epidemic, the experts who were putting the money down had Donald Trump as the favorite, even as much as I think 51.8 was his highest. We see right now that Biden is the favorite at 58.1. And these aren't polls. In fact, I think Biden is actually a little bit up in the polls. But the betting odds, Joe Biden has is over 50%, which is a big milestone that he never has hit lately. And if we also look at this model right here, you can see Biden's predicted chance to win in the 2020 election has gone up the most that it ever has been. And I think one reason why this is happening is just because a lot of things are coming together. So the markets are going down today. I assume that would probably hurt him if the election were held today, because a lot of the appeal for Donald Trump has been the economy. And all these polls that have come out, when you ask the specific question, who do you trust more in the economy, Trump still comes out. But if the markets are in the tank, if they're in the tank on election day, which I don't think they are, then Trump will probably lose, because I think a lot of his support is tied to the stock market. Because even if you don't like the guy personally, I think over 60% of Americans have money in the stock market. And if they trust Donald Trump to be a good president for the economy, then they're probably going to vote for him. Like the saying in 1992, it's about the economy, stupid. Anyway, so diving into what I think the electoral map would look like if it was held today, after the George Floyd protests with the economy in the tank, and it's looking like there's going to be a second resurgence in the coronavirus. Here are all these safe and likely states. The reason why I have Montana, Utah, South Carolina, and Alaska in kind of the likely column and not in the safe column is because in 2016, Donald Trump didn't win a majority of the votes. He had 48%, which was a lot more than Hillary Clinton, but still, Utah is a little bit weird. Montana, the Senate race is going to be really close. It could be very well likely that Steve Bullock wins in the Senate and that the Democrat wins the governor's seat too, which I think would just bring down Donald Trump a little bit. In Alaska, it's really weird. Lisa Murkowski, the senator there, said that she might not vote for Donald Trump. And Alaska's always kind of independent on its own, doesn't really follow national trends. And in South Carolina, South Carolina has a large African-American population, a little bit like Georgia. It's trending to the left. And Lindsey Graham has been down in a couple polls. I think Trump is only up in, by single digits in the polls. Obviously, I still think Trump's going to win all these 3 states, but that's kind of what I have it. And in New Hampshire, Trump, his unpopularity, he's underwater in his popularity rankings by 25%. So I think that is evidence enough why this is a likely Democratic state, even though this was the closest state in 2016. So diving into the lean Democratic states, I think that Arizona will be a lean Democrat state. All the polls have had Biden up, and although historically this has been a Republican-leaning state, I do think that Martha McSally is going to hurt Trump if the election were held today. Just with all the headwinds coming at the Trump campaign right now with the markets, COVID, and the race relations that if Trump maybe hasn't responded as well as he could have, I think Arizona would go in the lean Democratic column. Same thing with Michigan. If we have Michigan does have a pretty large African American population relative to the rest of the Rust Belt, with like cities, urban areas like Flint and Detroit. And if they come out in large numbers for Joe Biden, then I do see Joe Biden taking this state, because a lot of these African Americans were not enthused by Hillary Clinton in 2016. And this is part of the reason why Donald Trump won the state in 2016. Also, I think Minnesota. I think Minnesota will be pretty hard to predict just because there's been a lot of political action happening here with the Minneapolis riots. I really think this could go either way, but Minnesota has traditionally been a Democratic state, and especially with the death of George Floyd, I think a lot of people will be energized to vote for Joe Biden potentially because he's trying to be the candidate of police reform and all this stuff. Although I think Donald Trump is going to try to kind of play at both sides, kind of play the law and order side while also saying that we're going to try to reform the police. Next up is going to be Pennsylvania. And I think just this being the home state of Joe Biden, if the election were held today, I think that Joe Biden would have a distinct advantage in Pennsylvania, just being from Scranton and being able to kind of relate better than I think Hillary Clinton would be able to relate. And next up, going to the lean Republican states, I still think Ohio would be a lean Republican state, although Obama won the state twice. He won the state by like 8 or 9 points, and maybe he would only win this state by like 3 or 4 points, but that still would be enough for him to take that state. And same with Iowa, similar demographics as Ohio. And I think he would even win Iowa a little higher than Ohio, just because Iowa went for Donald Trump by even more than Ohio in 2016. And lastly is Texas and the lean Republican states. Although this state has trending Democratic, and in 2018 there was a really close midterms, I still think that Donald Trump will be able to hang on even with all these headwinds coming at his campaign. Although the polls have had this race very close, the polls have always indicated a closer race than it actually was on election day. And so I think there'll be Republicans will be motivated to come out for Donald Trump, even though in 2024 it might be a completely different picture. So moving on to the to the tilt Republican states, I do think that Georgia will still tilt to the Republicans. And I said in Joe Biden's best case scenario, I do think Georgia could flip. But even the polls right now still have Donald Trump pretty much in the lead. Let me see. I mean, it's getting a lot closer. Actually, okay, so the polling average does have Biden ahead, but just simply the fundamentals of the state, the expert ratings, they still have this in the – and also I don't really know where they're getting the average of the polls because a lot of these polls still have Donald Trump in the lead. So even if this election were held today, I still think Donald Trump could be able to pull out a victory just because of the fundamentals of the state. Even though the urban centers like Atlanta and with the Senate races kind of will make it a little bit more interesting. And lastly is North Carolina. I think North Carolina would be a very, very close state, probably the closest state. This model has North Carolina actually going to the Democrats by a hefty margin, or a 60.8% chance is not it's not just like neck and neck. In fact, they think North Carolina is going to be, or Georgia's going to be close to North Carolina. I tend to disagree, and I still have Donald Trump as a slight advantage just because he won the state by 3.5 points. So lastly, we're going to move to the tilt Democrat states. Wisconsin is a little bit more favorable to the Republicans in the Rust Belt, so I would still have this tilting towards the Democrats just because Donald Trump only won the state by a very slim margin. And lastly, in Florida, although the Republicans did very well in 2018, there have been chips in Donald Trump support among older Americans. And Florida is kind of known for having a lot of older population. So there you have it, 219 to 319. If the election were held today, I do think that Joe Biden would win by 100 electoral votes. But I want to say a few qualifiers because I do not think this is how the election is going to be on election day because there's a lot of variables. One thing is the market will get better. I expect the Dow Jones to reach over 30,000 by election day, maybe even hit 33,000 just because the Fed's going to pump in money. And Donald Trump will be willing to pass stimulus if he knows it's going to help his election chances. And so I think that Donald Trump is going to just push on the economy, and he's going to make sure he's going to use all the power of his presidency to make the economy better. Next up, I think there's the potential for Joe Biden to move further left. I think people inside of his party could. I mean, this is a major if. Like, for example, Joe Biden has said that he doesn't want to defund the police, which I think is a smart move by him because I think if he did, then Donald Trump would just rail on this a lot. And he already has an ad saying that Joe Biden hasn't stood up strong enough to kind of the more left-wing part of the Democratic Party that really wants to abolish the police. But I think Joe Biden could slowly get pulled over to the left and maybe even become more of a socialist figure. And if Donald Trump does portray Joe Biden as a socialist and that Donald Trump is the only person standing between American socialism, I think this could be an appeal that could help him in states like Florida and Arizona. Also, another variable would be like Biden's health. Is his mental fitness here? Will he be able to maintain this by election day? And then lastly, just the power of the presidency. Donald Trump has a lot of power. He controls the law and order in the United States, and he might just do something in the last week of the election that completely transforms things. And I think Democrats will be have a lot of watchdog groups watching out for this, but at the end of the day, Donald Trump is the president, so he has a lot more power than Joe Biden does being the challenger. So thank you all for watching this video. I don't think this is what the election is going to look like on election day, but if the election were held today, I do agree that this is probably what it would look like. It wouldn't be good for Donald Trump, and it would be good for Joe Biden. But unfortunately for Joe Biden, and maybe fortunately for Donald Trump, there is a lot more time for each candidate to make their appeals in the election. So thank you all for subscribing, and I'll be on the lookout for my video tomorrow.